Sarah Matthews stood in her cap and gown, diploma in hand, watching her parents' faces crumble as they realized what they had lost. The daughter they had overlooked for 22 years had just delivered a speech that would change everything. But by then, it was already too late. Sarah had always been the quiet one in the Matthews family. While her younger sister Emma commanded attention with her dramatic flair and constant need for validation, Sarah found comfort in books, good grades, and the simple satisfaction of doing things right. Growing up in their modest suburban home, she never questioned why Emma's dance recitals took precedence over her science fair projects, or why Emma's tears could instantly summon their parents' attention while Sarah's achievements were met with distracted nods. Their parents, David and Linda Matthews, worked hard to provide for their two daughters. David managed a small accounting firm, while Linda taught elementary school. Money was always tight, but they managed. Sarah learned early that being the easy child meant not asking for much. She wore hand-me-downs without complaint, took part-time jobs to pay for her school supplies, and never made a fuss when family dinners were scheduled around Emma's activities. When college application time came around, Sarah had already been working summers and weekends for 2 years, saving every penny. She'd earned a partial scholarship to the state university for her academic achievements, but would still need help with the remaining costs. Emma, 3 years younger, was just starting high school but had already begun talking about her dreams of studying theater at an expensive private arts college. Sarah remembered the evening she sat down with her parents to discuss her college plans. She had spreadsheets prepared, showing exactly how much she'd saved and what she'd need from them. Her F.A. There looked tired, rubbing his temples as he always did when money discussions came up. Her mother kept glancing toward Emma's room, where dramatic music was playing loudly. The conversation felt rushed, almost dismissive, with promises of, "We'll figure it out," and, "Don't worry about it right now." But Sarah did worry. She worried about the growing tension in the house, about her parents' whispered conversations that stopped whenever she entered the room, and about the strange way her mother's eyes would fill with tears whenever Emma performed one of her monologues. Something was shifting in their family dynamic, though Sarah couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. What Sarah didn't know was that her parents had already made a decision that would fracture their family forever. A decision that would test every assumption she'd made about love, fairness, and what it meant to be valued. The calm, predictable life she'd known was about to be shattered by a betrayal so profound, it would take years for the full impact to be understood. The first real sign that something was wrong came during Sarah's senior year of high school. She had been accepted to the state university's honors program and was preparing for her freshman year when she overheard a phone conversation that made her blood run cold. Emma was on the phone with her best friend, giggling about college visits. "Mom and Dad are taking me to look at Whitmore Academy next weekend," Emma said, her voice bright with excitement. "They said they've been saving money specifically for my education, and they want me to have the best opportunities possible." Sarah stood frozen in the hallway, the laundry basket in her hands suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. Whitmore Academy was one of the most expensive private colleges in the state, with tuition that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Her parents had been saving money specifically for Emma's education. What about her education? That evening at dinner, Sarah tried to bring up the subject casually. "I heard Emma mention visiting some colleges," she said, keeping her voice light. "That's exciting." Her parents exchanged a look that Sarah had become all too familiar with, the look that meant they were communicating about something she wasn't supposed to know. Her father cleared his throat. "Well, Emma's got some unique talents. We want to make sure she has every opportunity to develop them." What about Sarah's opportunities? The question came out before Sarah could stop herself, and the silence that followed was deafening. Her mother's face flushed. "Sarah, you're very capable. You'll do fine wherever you go. Emma needs more, specialized attention." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She excused herself from the table, claiming she wasn't feeling well, and spent the rest of the evening in her room, staring at her acceptance letter from the state university. She had been so proud of that letter, so excited about her future. Now it felt like a consolation prize, over the following weeks, Sarah began to notice other things. College brochures for expensive private schools appeared on the kitchen counter, all addressed to Emma. Her parents took hushed phone calls about tuition planning and investment portfolios. Meanwhile, when Sarah asked about filling out financial aid forms for the state university, her parents told her to handle it herself. The breaking point came when Sarah found a financial planning document on her father's desk. She hadn't meant to snoop, but it was lying open, and her eyes caught the header, Emma's College Fund, Projected Expenses. Below it was a detailed breakdown of costs for 4 years at Whitmore Academy, totaling over $200,000. Sarah's hands shook as she flipped through the pages. There was no corresponding document for her education. No college fund with her name on it. No projected expenses for her future. It was as if she didn't exist in their long-term planning at all. That night, Sarah lay in bed and finally understood what had been happening. Her parents hadn't forgotten about her education, they had actively chosen not to prioritize it. They had been saving money for Emma's college for years, while expecting Sarah to figure out her own way forward. The realization that her parents valued Emma's dreams over her own future was devastating. But what hurt even more was the deception, the way they had let her believe they were all in this together, when they had already decided she was on her own. The full scope of her parents' deception became clear 3 months before Sarah's high school graduation. She had been accepted to the state university's honors program with a partial scholarship, but still needed $15,000 per year for tuition, room, and board. Her parents had been vague about their contribution, always saying they'd work something out when she pressed them for details. Meanwhile, Emma's college planning had become a family obsession. Sarah watched her parents spend entire weekends driving Emma to campus tours, hiring an expensive college counselor, and even bringing in a private tutor to help improve Emma's SAT scores. The contrast was stark and painful, but Sarah told herself it was because Emma was younger and needed more guidance. The truth hit her like a sledgehammer during what should have been a routine family meeting about college finances. Sarah had prepared a presentation showing exactly how she planned to cover her college costs, including her scholarship, savings, and what she hoped they could contribute. She had even researched student loan options to minimize the burden on her parents. "We need to talk," her father said, his voice unusually serious. Her mother sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, unable to meet Sarah's eyes. "Sarah, we've been thinking about this for a long time," her father continued. "Your mother and I have made a decision about college funding. We've decided to put all our available resources toward Emma's education." Sarah felt the world tilt. "What do you mean, all your resources?" "Emma's talents are very specific," her mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "She needs specialized training that only a school like Whitmore can provide. You're academically gifted, you can succeed anywhere. Emma needs this opportunity." "But what about my opportunity?" Sarah's voice cracked. "What about the promises you made?" "We never promised anything specific," her father said, and Sarah could see him retreating into the cold, logical mindset he used at work. "We said we'd help where we could, and we are helping. We're providing you with a home and support until you graduate." Sarah stared at her parents, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in her life. They weren't just choosing Emma over her, they were doing it while making her feel guilty for even asking for help. They were rewriting history, pretending they had never implied they would support her education the way they were supporting Emma's. "I've been working since I was 15, Sarah said quietly. "I've saved every penny. I've never asked for anything. I've been the perfect daughter, and this is how you repay me." "Don't be dramatic," her mother said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You're stronger than Emma. You don't need us the way she does." That phrase, "you don't need us," would echo in Sarah's mind for years to come. It was the moment she realized that her independence, her good grades, her lack of demands weren't seen as strengths to be proud of. They were seen as reasons to overlook her, to assume she would be fine no matter what happened. Sarah left that meeting with a clear understanding. she was truly on her own. Her parents had chosen Emma's dreams over her future, and they expected her to accept that choice without complaint. The family she thought she knew, the parents she thought loved her equally, had been an illusion, but Sarah also left that meeting with something else, a quiet, burning determination that would reshape her entire life. If her parents thought she didn't need them, she would prove them right. And someday, they would understand exactly what their choice had cost them. The weeks following her parents' revelation passed in a haze of disbelief and practical panic. Sarah had exactly 4 months to figure out how to pay for college, and the gap between her scholarship and savings and the actual cost seemed insurmountable. She applied for every grant and scholarship she could find, took on extra shifts at her part-time job, and even considered delaying college for a year to work and save more money. The worst part wasn't the financial stress, it was watching her family carry on as if nothing had happened. Emma bubbled with excitement about her upcoming senior year and college visits, while their parents fussed over her college essays and extracurricular activities. Sarah felt like a ghost in her own home, invisible and irrelevant. The breaking point came during Emma's 17th birthday party. Sarah had offered to help with the preparations, but her mother had brushed her off. "Don't worry about it," Linda had said. "Just focus on your own things." Sarah spent the day of the party in her room, ostensibly studying, but really just trying to avoid the painful reminder of how little she mattered in the family hierarchy. That evening, as the party wound down, Sarah overheard her parents talking to Emma's friends' parents about college plans. Her father was describing the sacrifices they were making to send Emma to Whitmore Academy, painting himself and Linda as devoted parents who would do anything for their daughter's future. "We've been saving for years," David said proudly. "We've cut back on vacations, driven older cars, skipped home improvements, all so Emma could have this opportunity. Education is the most important investment we can make in our children's future." Sarah stood in the doorway, watching her father receive admiring nods from the other parents. They praised him for his dedication, his sacrifice, his commitment to his daughter's dreams. Not one of them asked about Sarah's plans, and her father didn't volunteer any information about his other daughter's future. That night, Sarah sat at her desk and wrote a letter she never intended to send, a letter to her parents explaining how their decision had affected her, how their words had cut her, how abandoned she felt. Writing it was cathartic, but it also crystallized something important. She was done hoping for their approval or support. She was done trying to make them see her worth. The final blow came when Sarah received a letter from the State University's financial aid office. Due to her parents' income, she didn't qualify for need-based aid, despite the fact that they had made it clear they wouldn't be contributing to her education. The system assumed parental support that didn't exist, leaving Sarah caught in a bureaucratic nightmare. When she brought this problem to her parents, hoping they might at least co-sign a loan or provide a letter explaining their position, her father's response was brutal in its simplicity: "You'll figure it out. You always do." That phrase, "you always do," revealed how thoroughly her parents had convinced themselves that their neglect was actually a favor. They had decided that because Sarah was capable and independent, she didn't deserve the same investment Emma did. They had turned her strengths into reasons to abandon her. Sarah realized then that she wasn't just losing financial support, she was losing her family. Her parents had made a choice that went beyond money. They had chosen to see one daughter as worthy of sacrifice and investment, while seeing the other as someone who should be grateful for the basics and expect nothing more. The girl who had always been the good daughter, the easy child, the one who never caused problems, was about to disappear forever. In her place would emerge a young woman who understood that love wasn't guaranteed, that family loyalty wasn't reciprocal, and that sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones who hurt you most. Sarah's senior year of high school became a masterclass in emotional survival. She perfected the art of smiling when teachers asked about her college plans, of deflecting questions from friends about her family's support, of maintaining the facade that everything was fine when everything was falling apart. At home, she retreated into herself, becoming even quieter than before. She stopped participating in family discussions about the future, stopped asking for help with anything, and began to treat her parents with the polite distance she might show to acquaintances. Her parents, perhaps relieved that she wasn't fighting their decision, seemed to interpret her silence as acceptance. Emma, caught up in her own excitement about college, barely noticed the change in family dynamics. When she did notice Sarah's withdrawal, she attributed it to stress about graduating. "You're so lucky you're not as dramatic as I am," Emma told Sarah one evening. "You handle everything so calmly." Sarah wanted to laugh at the irony. Emma thought she was calm, but inside, Sarah was experiencing a grief so profound it sometimes made it hard to breathe. She was mourning not just her parents' support, but her entire understanding of her place in the world. The family she had trusted, the parents she had believed loved her unconditionally, had revealed themselves to be something entirely different, but in the depths of that grief, something else was growing. Sarah began to understand that her parents' neglect had inadvertently given her something precious, the absolute certainty that she could rely only on herself. While Emma was learning to depend on others to solve her problems, Sarah was learning to solve her own. She threw herself into research, spending hours at the library and online, exploring every possible avenue for funding her education. She discovered scholarships she'd never heard of, work-study programs that could help cover costs, and even a path to establish financial independence from her parents for aid purposes, though it would require her to support herself entirely. The decision to pursue financial independence was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. It meant she would have to move out, find full-time work, and support herself for a full year before she could qualify for aid that reflected her actual financial situation rather than her parents' income. It meant delaying college, but it also meant never having to depend on people who had already proven they couldn't be depended upon. Sarah kept her plans to herself, knowing that sharing them would only invite criticism or fake concern from her parents. Instead, she quietly lined up a full-time job at a local insurance company, found a tiny studio apartment she could afford, and prepared to step into a life her parents couldn't control or undermine. The night before graduation, Sarah sat in her room, packing her things and preparing for the speech she would give as valedictorian. She had worked on that speech for weeks, crafting words that would honor her achievements while acknowledging the journey that had brought her to this moment. As she wrote, Sarah realized that her parents' betrayal had done something unexpected. It had freed her from the need to please them. For the first time in her life, she was about to do something purely for herself, without worrying about their approval or disapproval. The quiet, overlooked daughter was about to find her voice, and when she did, everyone would finally understand what they had been too blind to see. 2 weeks before graduation, Sarah encountered someone who would change the trajectory of her story entirely. Mrs. Helen Rodriguez had been Sarah's English teacher for 3 years, and more importantly, she had been quietly observing the Matthews family dynamics during school events and parent conferences. "Sarah," Mrs. Rodriguez said after class one day, "could you stay for a moment? I'd like to discuss your graduation speech." Sarah had been dreading this conversation. Her speech was personal, perhaps too personal for a school ceremony, but it was the only way she could think of to honor her own journey without completely falling apart. "I've read your draft," Mrs. Rodriguez continued, her voice gentle but firm. "It's powerful. But I think there's something you should know before you deliver it." Sarah braced herself for criticism, for suggestions to tone down the emotion or make it more traditional. Instead, Mrs. Rodriguez surprised her. "I've been teaching for 28 years, she said. "I've seen many families, many different approaches to supporting children. What's happening in your family isn't normal, Sarah. It's not your fault, and it's not something you should have to handle alone." The kindness in her teacher's voice nearly broke Sarah's composure. For months, she had been carrying the weight of her parents' rejection in isolation, believing that somehow she must have deserved it. "I want to help," Mrs. Rodriguez continued. "I have connections at the state university, and I've been making some calls. There's a program for students in your situation, students who are academically gifted but lack family support. It's not well publicized, but it exists." Over the next hour, Mrs. Rodriguez outlined a path Sarah hadn't known existed. There were emergency scholarships for students facing family crises, work-study programs that could cover living expenses, and even a mentorship program that connected students with successful alumni who could provide guidance and support. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah asked, overwhelmed by the unexpected help. "Because I see you," Mrs. Rodriguez said simply. "I see how hard you work, how much you've accomplished despite having no support at home. I see a young woman who deserves every opportunity to succeed, and I refuse to let you slip through the cracks because your parents can't see your worth." For the first time in months, Sarah felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. Not the desperate hope she had been clinging to that her parents would change their minds, but real, practical hope based on concrete opportunities. Mrs. Rodriguez helped Sarah navigate the applications for emergency aid, connected her with the right people at the university, and even offered to write additional recommendation letters. More importantly, she helped Sarah understand that her parents' inability to support her was a reflection of their limitations, not her worth. "Your graduation speech," Mrs. Rodriguez said as their meeting ended, "deliver it exactly as you wrote it. Some truths need to be spoken, especially when they might prevent other young people from experiencing what you've been through." Sarah left that meeting feeling lighter than she had in months. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was preparing to thrive. And she was no longer facing her future alone. The teacher who had noticed her when her own parents overlooked her had become an unexpected ally, proving that sometimes the family we choose is stronger than the family we're born into. With Mrs. Rodriguez's help, Sarah's final weeks of high school became a whirlwind of applications, interviews, and planning. The emergency scholarship program at the state university was more comprehensive than Sarah had dared to hope. It would cover her full tuition, provide housing, and even include a stipend for books and living expenses, but perhaps more importantly, Sarah was discovering a network of people who believed in her potential. Professor Janet Chen, who would become her academic advisor, spent an hour on the phone with Sarah discussing her career goals and course planning. Alumni mentor Marcus Thompson, who had grown up in a similar situation, offered both practical advice and emotional support. For the first time in her life, Sarah was experiencing what it felt like to be seen as an investment worth making. These people, who barely knew her, were willing to bet on her future in ways her own parents never had. The change in Sarah's demeanor was subtle but profound. She carried herself differently, spoke up more in class, and began to see her independence not as abandonment but as strength. Her parents, focused on Emma's final semester and college preparations, barely noticed the transformation happening under their own roof. Sarah's graduation speech went through several revisions as she worked with Mrs. Rodriguez to find the right balance between honesty and dignity. She wanted to tell her truth without destroying her family publicly, but she also wanted to honor the journey that had brought her to this moment of triumph. 3 days before graduation, Sarah moved her belongings to her new studio apartment. She told her parents she was getting a head start on independence, and they seemed relieved rather than concerned. Emma helped her move, chattering about her own upcoming college adventures, oblivious to the deeper significance of Sarah's departure. "I'm going to miss you," Emma said as they carried the last box up the stairs to Sarah's apartment. "But I'm also excited for both of us. We're both starting new chapters." Sarah looked at her younger sister, realizing that Emma genuinely didn't understand the vast difference in their circumstances. Emma saw them as two daughters equally supported and loved, both launching into bright futures. She had no idea that Sarah was launching alone, without a safety net, while Emma was being catapulted forward by every resource their parents could provide. "Yes," Sarah said quietly, "we're both starting new chapters." The night before graduation, Sarah sat in her small apartment, reviewing her speech one final time. Tomorrow, she would stand before her graduating class, their families, and her own parents, and she would speak her truth. She would acknowledge the journey that had brought her here, the lessons she had learned, and the strength she had discovered. She thought about the girl she had been at the beginning of senior year, desperate for her parents' approval, willing to minimize her own needs to keep the peace, convinced that being the easy child was her role in the family. That girl was gone, replaced by a young woman who understood her own worth and was prepared to build a life that reflected that understanding. Sarah had discovered something her parents never intended to teach her, that their love was conditional, but her own strength was not. Tomorrow, she would show them, and herself, exactly what they had underestimated. Graduation day dawned clear and bright, with the kind of perfect weather that made everything seem possible. Sarah stood in the bathroom of her apartment, adjusting her cap and gown, and looking at herself in the mirror. The young woman staring back at her was someone she was still getting to know, confident, self-possessed, and ready to speak her truth. At the school, Sarah's parents found seats in the auditorium, chatting with other families about college plans and summer preparations. David and Linda Matthews looked proud and comfortable, playing the role of supportive parents to perfection. They had even brought flowers for Sarah, a gesture that would have meant everything to her just a few months ago. Emma sat beside them, beaming with excitement for her sister. Despite everything, Sarah felt a pang of affection for Emma. Her sister's self-absorption wasn't malicious, it was simply the natural result of being the center of attention for so long. Emma genuinely believed that both daughters were equally cherished, because that's what she had always been told. As the ceremony began, Sarah felt remarkably calm. She had spent so many years seeking her parents' approval, measuring her worth by their reactions, that she had forgotten what it felt like to act purely from her own convictions. Today, she would speak not to please them or punish them, but to honor her own journey and perhaps help other young people who might be facing similar struggles. When her name was called as valedictorian, Sarah walked to the podium with steady steps. She looked out at the sea of faces, her classmates, their families, her teachers, and there in the third row, her parents. David and Linda Matthews were smiling, their phones out to record their daughter's moment of triumph. Sarah began her speech with the traditional acknowledgments, thanking the faculty, the administration, and the families who had supported the graduating class. But then her tone shifted, becoming more personal and reflective. Today, I want to talk about the different forms that support can take, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. Some of us have been fortunate to have families who believed in our dreams and invested in our futures. Others have learned to believe in ourselves when no one else would. She saw her parents shift uncomfortably, perhaps sensing that the speech was heading in an unexpected direction. I've learned that there are two types of strength, Sarah continued. The strength that comes from knowing you have people who will catch you if you fall, and the strength that comes from knowing you can catch yourself. Both are valuable, but only one is truly yours. Sarah went on to describe the journey of self-discovery that had brought her to this moment, the realization that her worth wasn't determined by others' investment in her, and the profound gratitude she felt for the teachers and mentors who had seen her potential when others didn't. To my fellow graduates who have walked this path with unwavering family support, cherish that gift and remember that not everyone has been so fortunate. To those who have walked this path alone, know that your strength is remarkable, your achievements are your own, and your future is limitless. She paused, looking directly at her parents for the first time during the speech. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the opportunity to discover their own strength. Sometimes what looks like abandonment is actually the birth of independence. The auditorium was silent, hanging on every word. Sarah's classmates recognized the courage it took to speak so honestly, while the adults in the audience began to understand the deeper story being told. As Sarah concluded her speech and walked back to her seat, she felt something she had never experienced before, complete ownership of her own story. She had spoken her truth with dignity and grace, and she had done it for herself. Not for anyone else's approval or disapproval. The applause was thunderous, but Sarah barely heard it. She was already thinking about the future she would build, the life she would create, and the young woman she was becoming. The immediate aftermath of Sarah's graduation speech was a study in contrasts. Her classmates crowded around her, many with tears in their eyes, sharing their own stories of family struggles and expressing admiration for her courage. Teachers who had worked with Sarah for years told her how proud they were, how much her words had meant to them, but in the crowd of well-wishers, Sarah's parents stood apart, their faces pale and strained. The flowers they had brought seemed to wilt in David's hands as he processed what his daughter had just said to a room full of their neighbors, colleagues, and friends. Emma was the first to reach Sarah, her eyes wide with confusion and concern. Sarah, that was. I mean, it was beautiful, but, were you talking about us? About our family? Sarah looked at her sister with compassion. Emma, I was talking about my journey. Everyone's journey is different. But you made it sound like Mom and Dad don't support you, Emma said, her voice dropping to a whisper. That's not true, is it? Before Sarah could answer, their parents approached. The pride that had been shining in their faces earlier was gone, replaced by something Sarah had never seen before, shame. We need to talk, her father said quietly, his voice tight with emotion. Yes, Sarah agreed, we do. The conversation that followed in the school parking lot was unlike any the Matthews family had ever had. For the first time, David and Linda were forced to confront the reality of their choices, to see their actions reflected back to them through their daughter's eyes. You humiliated us, Linda said, but her voice lacked conviction. In front of everyone No. I told the truth, Sarah replied calmly. I didn't mention you by name. I didn't share private details. I simply told my story. Your story. David's voice was strained. You made it sound like we don't love you, like we don't care about your future. Do you? Sarah asked, and the question hung in the air like a challenge. Do you care about my future, Dad? Because your actions suggest otherwise. For the first time, Emma began to understand the full scope of what had happened. Wait, she said, looking between her parents and Sarah. You're not helping her pay for college. At all? The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's eyes filled with tears, while David struggled to find words that could justify their decision. It's complicated, he finally said. Sarah is more capable than you are, Emma. She doesn't need as much help. She doesn't need help, or you decided she doesn't deserve it? Sarah asked, her voice still calm but carrying a steel that her parents had never heard before. Emma looked stricken. I didn't know, she whispered. I thought they were helping both of us. They are helping both of us, Sarah said gently. They're helping you with everything you need, and they're helping me learn that I don't need them. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Sarah's parents alternating between defensive justifications and grudging admissions of their failures. They had convinced themselves that their neglect was actually a favor, that they were teaching Sarah independence. But faced with the reality of their daughter's pain and the judgment of their community, their rationalizations crumbled. Mrs. Rodriguez approached the family as the conversation was winding down. Sarah, she said warmly, I wanted to congratulate you on your speech. It was exactly what needed to be said. She turned to David and Linda Matthews with a look of polite disapproval. Your daughter is remarkable, she said. She's overcome challenges that would have broken lesser people, and she's done it with grace and dignity. I hope you're proud of her. We are, Linda said weakly, but Mrs. Rodriguez was already walking away. As the family separated to go to their respective cars, Sarah felt a profound sense of closure. She had spoken her truth, confronted her parents' choices, and emerged stronger. The reckoning had been painful but necessary, and now she could move forward with a clear conscience and a clean slate. The daughter who had been overlooked for so long had finally made herself impossible to ignore. 6 months later, Sarah stood in her dorm room at the State University, hanging up the phone after a conversation with her academic advisor. She had just been accepted into the university's honors research program, a prestigious opportunity that would allow her to work closely with faculty on cutting-edge projects while earning advanced credit toward graduate school. The girl who had once worried about affording textbooks was now being courted by professors who recognized her potential. The emergency scholarship program had provided more than just financial support. It had connected Sarah with a network of mentors and opportunities that had accelerated her academic and personal growth. Her relationship with her family had evolved in unexpected ways. Emma, who had been genuinely shocked to learn about their parents' financial favoritism, had started calling Sarah regularly. Their conversations were deeper now, more honest, as Emma grappled with her own guilt and Sarah learned to separate her sister's innocence from her parents' choices. "I keep thinking about what you said," Emma told her during one of their calls. "About there being two types of strength. I'm rooting to realize I don't know which type I have." "You'll figure it out," Sarah assured her. "And when you do, you'll be proud of what you discover." Her parents had reached out several times since graduation, their messages varying between awkward attempts at reconciliation and defensive justifications of their past decisions. Sarah had responded politely but distantly, maintaining a cordial relationship while protecting herself from further disappointment. The most significant change was in Sarah herself. The quiet, overlooked daughter had been replaced by a young woman who understood her own worth and wasn't afraid to advocate for herself. She had learned to build her own support system, to recognize genuine care when she encountered it, and to distinguish between love and obligation. Professor Chen had become a true mentor, helping Sarah navigate not just her academic path but also the emotional journey of building a life independent of her family's expectations. "You've turned your greatest challenge into your greatest strength," she told Sarah during one of their meetings. "That's not something everyone can do." As Sarah prepared for her second year of college, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The pain of her parents' betrayal had been real and profound, but it had also been transformative. She had learned that resilience wasn't just about surviving difficult circumstances, it was about using those circumstances to become stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Her graduation speech had been shared online by several classmates, and Sarah had received messages from young people across the country who had found themselves in similar situations. Many of them had been inspired to seek out resources and support they hadn't known existed, proving that Sarah's courage in speaking her truth had created ripple effects far beyond her own life. The final vindication came when Sarah received a letter from the university's scholarship committee, informing her that she had been selected for a full merit scholarship for her remaining 3 years. The letter praised her academic achievements, her leadership potential, and her resilience in the face of personal challenges. Sarah called Mrs. Rodriguez to share the news, and her former teacher's joy was palpable. "I always knew you were special," she said. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become." As Sarah hung up the phone, she realized that the approval she had once craved from her parents had been replaced by something far more valuable, her own self-respect and the recognition of people who truly saw her worth. The girl who had been overlooked had become impossible to ignore, not through anger or revenge, but through the quiet determination to build a life that reflected her true value. She had learned that sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to succeed despite those who doubt us, and that the strongest families are sometimes the ones we choose for ourselves. Moral of the story: true strength isn't measured by the support we receive, but by our ability to thrive when that support is absent. Sometimes the people who overlook us give us the greatest gift of all, the opportunity to discover our own worth and build a life that truly belongs to us. The love we give ourselves is often more reliable than the love we hope to receive from others, and the respect we earn through our own achievements is more lasting than the approval we seek from those who cannot see our value.